The elevator doors slid open with their usual polished grace, reflecting the golden light of the corporate lobby. Margaret Hensley, CEO of one of the city's fastest-growing financial firms, stepped in. Her heels clicked sharply against the marble floor, a sound that echoed authority. She carried with her the aura of someone accustomed to boardrooms, skyscrapers, and people lowering their voices when she walked by. But this morning felt different. Something in the air seemed heavier, quieter, almost as if the building itself was holding its breath. Margaret pressed the button for the 38th floor, where her office commanded a sweeping view of the skyline. She set her briefcase down and exhaled, preparing herself for another day of decisions that would ripple through thousands of lives. Just before the doors closed, a hand slid between them, holding them open. A janitor in a navy blue uniform stepped in, pushing a cart of cleaning supplies. Beside him stood a boy, no older than 10, clutching a worn backpack. His sneakers were scuffed, his jeans faded. He had the kind of wide, curious eyes that noticed everything but spoke little. The janitor gave Margaret a polite nod, lowering his head slightly, as if unsure if he should acknowledge her at all. She returned the nod stiffly, her mind already drifting back to her upcoming meetings. The elevator hummed as it began its climb. Then, unexpectedly, the boy looked up at her. His voice was quiet, but clear, almost cutting through the mechanical whir of the elevator. "Don't talk." Margaret blinked, caught off guard. She hadn't planned to speak, but the suddenness of his words made her look down. The boy's eyes didn't waver. "Don't talk. The reason will shock you." The janitor froze, his knuckles tightening on the cart handle. His face flushed with embarrassment. "Eli," he whispered harshly, "don't bother the lady. She's working. Say sorry." But Margaret couldn't look away from the boy. Something about the way he said it, firm yet innocent, struck her. She had been told, "Don't talk," before, in boardrooms, negotiations, even in her own childhood when her father silenced her. But this was different. This wasn't dismissal. It was warning, maybe even protection. Her lips parted to ask what he meant, but the boy shook his head slightly, as if to say not yet. The silence thickened inside the elevator. Margaret shifted uncomfortably. She wasn't easily rattled. After all, she had faced billion-dollar deals, hostile takeovers, and rooms full of doubters waiting for her to slip. Yet here she was, unsettled by a janitor's son who hadn't even reached middle school. The elevator dinged on the 12th floor. The janitor pulled his cart out halfway, then hesitated. "We'll get out here," he muttered, trying to steer his son. But Eli tugged his sleeve. "No, Dad. We have to stay. She needs us." Margaret's brows furrowed. "She needs us." The janitor's face turned redder. "Eli, enough." Yet before he could push the boy out, the doors slid shut again, trapping all three inside as the elevator resumed its climb. Margaret stole another glance at the boy. He was staring straight ahead now, lips pressed together, as though bracing himself. His hands clutched the straps of his backpack tightly, knuckles white. The janitor sighed, whispering under his breath, "I'm sorry, ma'am. He's different. Says things sometimes that don't make sense." But Margaret wasn't so sure. She had learned, in her rise to the top, to listen between the lines. Sometimes the simplest voices carried the deepest truths. The boy finally spoke again, softly. "If you had talked, you would have said something today you couldn't take back, and it would have broken someone forever." Margaret felt a chill crawl down her spine. On the 20th floor, the elevator jolted slightly, slowing as another passenger stepped in, a young associate, arms full of documents. He looked surprised to see the CEO there but quickly nodded in respect. He began to chatter nervously about a presentation scheduled for later that morning. Margaret almost responded out of habit, her voice rising automatically. But she stopped. The boy's words echoed in her head, "Don't talk." Instead, she gave the associate a simple nod. He seemed relieved enough to escape her scrutiny, staring at the floor until his stop came. When the doors closed again, Margaret turned to the boy. "What makes you say that?" she asked finally, her voice calm but curious. The boy's answer was immediate. "Because sometimes words cut deeper than knives, and today, your words would have been the sharpest." The janitor shifted uneasily. "Eli, please," but Margaret leaned down slightly, eyes narrowing. "Who told you that?" The boy looked up at her, his gaze strangely steady for someone so young. "Nobody, I just know. I feel it." By the 30th floor, the silence had grown unbearable. Margaret's mind raced, replaying conversations she was about to have. She had planned to deliver tough news today: layoffs, restructures, cutting whole departments. She had her speech rehearsed, crisp and unsparing. Efficiency over empathy. Survival over sentiment. But now, doubt crept in. Would her words break someone beyond repair? Her heart gave a sudden pang. She remembered her own mother, years ago, when her father's cruel words had broken her spirit. Margaret had sworn never to let words destroy her. Yet, had she become the very thing she once despised? At the 35th floor, the elevator stopped again. This time, no one entered. Just silence, broken only by the faint hum of machinery. The boy finally whispered, almost to himself, "You don't have to say everything you think. Sometimes silence saves lives." Margaret inhaled sharply. The janitor placed a hand on his son's shoulder, as if steadying him. Then, as if sensing her turmoil, Eli looked up at her and added quietly, "But kindness always speaks louder." Something inside her cracked. By the time the elevator reached the 38th floor, Margaret was no longer the same. She stepped out, briefcase in hand, but her stride lacked its usual hardness. She turned back once, watching the boy and his father disappear behind the closing doors. The janitor's eyes had carried embarrassment, but also gratitude, as though he knew his son had just shifted something far greater than either of them could see. Margaret walked into her office, overlooking the city. The skyline stretched endlessly, glass and steel monuments to ambition. But all she could think about was the small boy with the old backpack who told her not to talk. Her assistant entered moments later, ready with the morning schedule. The layoffs meeting was first on the list. Margaret hesitated, then slowly shook her head. "Reschedule it," she said. The assistant blinked. "Reschedule? But—" Margaret cut her off, her voice softer than usual. "Just reschedule it. I need time to think." The day unfolded differently. Instead of launching into ruthless decisions, Margaret found herself listening more, speaking less. She caught herself each time sharp words rose to her tongue, remembering the boy's warning. By evening, something extraordinary had happened. She hadn't fired anyone. Instead, she had discovered alternatives, shifting roles, retraining programs, temporary cutbacks that spared livelihoods. Options she would have dismissed before now seemed possible, because she gave herself space to not speak before it was too late. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the office gold, Margaret finally allowed herself to breathe. She felt lighter, freer, as though she had been pulled back from the edge of a cliff she hadn't even realized she was standing on. She leaned against the glass, watching the city lights flicker alive. Somewhere in this vast city, a janitor and his son were probably finishing their shift, heading home to a modest apartment. They would never know what they had changed. But Margaret knew, and she would never forget.